One of the things I wanted to say as thoughts that came to my mind as they were talking, this linking the affordable housing with economic development and the competitiveness of our region. I think that's so important, and we will hear that carried through a number of the discussions today, and bear that in mind, because I think that it's affordable housing, I'm thinking, is not just because, we like affordable housing and we want to preserve it and we're good people and we think it's a fair thing to do and social equity and these kind of things, but I think that's all good and strong. I don't want to diminish that, but I also think there's a powerful other argument to be made to complement this, that we really do have to understand and build on this, that it is about the competitiveness and the viability and the global stature of our city and our region. I think that's very important. The other thing that Julie said, she talked about, and I think another link there, is preserving affordable rental housing. Never did we think we should preserve the affordable rental housing, and she doesn't think this, she just didn't say it today, that affordable rental housing, we don't want just a housing unit just out there. A housing unit that's just out there in a community that doesn't work is worthless, pretty much. People don't want to live there. It doesn't provide a good quality of life. It doesn't support people's participation in the broader economy. So the challenge, but so many we'll hear about, so many of our affordable housing units are located in fact, communities that are having real big difficulty. So if we preserve these units, no point preserving units in communities that don't work. You got to get to the bigger question, how do you make communities, the units are in these communities, how do you make these communities work so that people want to live there? So it's a community development question as well. The other thing I would just say on Julie and her copywriting, she has lots of good ideas. One idea was about, we had a program at the Department of Housing called Design Matters, which was to encourage good architectural design on publicly assisted buildings. And I'm sure here at UIC, Roberta Feldman, who I don't think is here in the architecture department, all of a sudden she had a Design Matters program at the UIC, and there were others and so forth, but we were not upset. We were happy that others took up the mantle. So she's a font of good ideas. Thank you very much, Julie, for your leadership and support. So as I said, we wouldn't be here today if we didn't care about preserving affordable rental housing. But I wanted to review some basics for us as we go into today's discussions. So first, how many renter households are there in Cook County? Well, it turns out there's about 795,000 of them, which is about 41% of all of the households in Cook County. That has increased slightly over the last year as we move from home ownership to rental. Renters in general, the other point I would make on number one there, as Julie said too, I don't know if we need a show of hands, but basically all of us have rented at some point in our lives. So it's not a foreign population or something that we don't know about. We all know, we all have been, and we know renters. Renters generally have lower incomes than homeowners. Overall in Cook County, there's a household income of about $51,000, median household income. That is $31,000 for renters is the median income, $71,000 for owners. With this, but the median rent in Cook County is $1,000 a month. Not a terrible rent, but that median rent, in order to, with that median rent, more than half of our renter households are cost burdened. Cost burdened meaning they pay more than 30% of their income for housing. So that's, we have income required to make median rent affordable. So if you were going to use this 30% calculation, you see that the median rent's $1,000. If you were going to make the median rent affordable, you would have to have a household income of $40,000. That's actually about 1 1/3 times what the median household income is. And so we have 410,000 households paying more than 30% of their income, so more than half of them, and more than 50% considered severely cost burdens, 225,000 households paying more than 50% of their income in rent. I would think, if you ever think about this yourself, just think about if whatever your income is, think about if you were paying 30% of your income on housing or 50% of your income on housing, and what that feels like and what that means you have available for all your other needs. Looking at the, so this is for households. So I said you need $40,000, 1 1/3 times the median household income of $31,000 to make it affordable. For everybody making under $40,000, 83% of them, 83% are rent burdened, and less than 30,000, 90% of households under 30,000. Remember, the median income's 31. So 90% of people underneath that level are cost burden, paying more than 30%. Now, we throw around this term, affordable rental housing. So let's talk a little bit, just so we're all on the same page as we have these conversations and can talk to each other about the nuances. So affordable, at its basic meaning, is that affordable, a household pays less than 30% of their income for housing. So what's affordable for me is different what's affordable for you. It's a relative term. That's when you first start off about this, you're paying 30% of your income for housing or less. But if we care about that, the people we really care about who have a need, people at upper incomes don't have a problem with this. In fact, when we've done research in the past, we found if you have if you have above 60 or 80% of median income, in fact, there's lots of housing options that are affordable to you throughout the region. But so for our purposes, DePaul and the Preservation Compact have used $35,000 household income as a benchmark in calculating what's affordable. This is approximately, I'm told, about 150% of poverty. It's 50% of the area median income for Chicago. So when we move to this, then the next conversation is, well, how many affordable units are there? We're talking about how many units are affordable to people around $35,000 household income, although recognize that a lot of people have a lot less income than that. In fact, I think we said that more than half of the renter population has a household income less than that. Affordable is not a synonym or a euphemism for publicly assisted. This is a quote from John Weicker, who did some research for MacArthur. Now, it's not that publicly assisted can't be affordable. It can be, and it could be, and that's great. But public housing, Section 8, tax credit developments, which may or may not be affordable according to these standards, actually. But any of that public assistance, even people with vouchers, that's all, they could be part of affordable housing. But don't think that just because we use that word affordable, we're immediately talking public assistance. That's part of it. But most affordable units are not publicly assisted. In fact, Harvard came out just recently in their most recent State of the Nation's Housing Report in 2009. They had a category, low-cost rentals in the U.S. 75%. This is not just a little bit. 75% private, unsubsidized, or low-cost, or is private, unsubsidized housing, private market. 25% is all other public subsidies. Everything I mentioned. Public housing, tax credits, Section 8, all of that, people with vouchers, that's 25%. So just bear this in mind as we proceed with our conversations. Another question. So who is it that makes, why do we care about people under 35,000? Who is this? Is it just people who aren't working, or people, who is this? Well, it turns out lots of people in our economy, lots of people make less than 35,000. Private school teachers, bank tellers, laborers, construction laborers, janitors, nursing aides, truck driver, wait staff, retail salesperson, office clerk, many, many others you can think of who are core parts of our economy, working full-time. I remember I was I'm not sure what this status is right now, we were in some planning meeting at the city and realized that I think at the time Walmart was the largest employer in the U.S., and their average rate, pay scale, was $10 an hour. And so you realized, I mean, what it struck me for the first time, oh, so somebody working full-time, 2,000 hours a year, would be making $20,000. And just think, basically, you think $20,000 is desperately poor. You know, that, I mean, you can't afford anything. That's what I would say in general. You were going to be way overpaying for your housing. You could say if you were paying your median rent of $1,000 a month, which you wouldn't be doing, there goes $12,000 of your $20,000. But it's, you know, you realize, and that's a full-time worker of the largest employer in the U.S. at that time. We have, in Cook County, we have a growing need for affordable housing. You can see that right now, the estimate is that in 2005, this is from DePaul, we had 165,000 housing units, a gap in the need, 180,000 in 2009, and projected to grow to 224,000 in 2020. So when we preserve affordable rental housing, as we've said, it provides security for families, and it is a key building block for strong, vibrant communities. And preserving what we have is extremely cost-effective. New construction of affordable rental housing, new construction of affordable rental housing relies on increasingly scarce public subsidies. And it typically costs $300,000 or more per unit to build a publicly subsidized housing development, especially for family housing. Private market developers, if a private market, so you say, well, why can't that be built by the private market? Many people do say that now, actually. Oh, your private market's building rental housing. So private market might not cost $300,000 a unit. Maybe it costs $200 or $250 or something like that for a new unit. But even at that, they would have to charge rents far in excess of our median rents and what most renters can pay. So we are seeing some new construction of rental housing downtown, for instance, in very hot markets where you can charge very high rents. But I just want to emphasize, not a way in the world that a private market could produce new affordable rental housing. The numbers don't come anywhere near working for the rents that would have to be charged. But on the other hand, in many communities, there are investors every day who are preserving affordable rental housing for all-in costs of about $40,000 a unit. This is people, sometimes those folks of you who are in this field who do this know this is true. Other people who are not don't believe this. But this is happening every day. At CIC, we lend to these kind of people. And $40,000 is not an unusual amount. $40,000, $50,000. In Northside communities now, it may go significantly higher than that, but I can tell you nowhere near $300,000 a unit. And it's totally funded by the private market. As I said earlier, conditions have changed dramatically since we originally convened the Preservation Compact. We've been through the boom in which property values and home ownership rates hit all-time highs, and we've been through the bust, which is the most severe and prolonged economic downturn since the Great Depression, and now we are seemingly in the midst of an economic recovery. Overall, the U.S. economy is gradually improving. We have productivity, profits, sales, the stock market, all increasing, as have housing starts and loan originations. Commercial inventories are down, as are foreclosures through most of the country. We know that foreclosures are not really down. Whenever you see these numbers now, they're not down in Illinois. It's because we've lagged behind the rest of the country on this. But in fact, in the rest of the country, the foreclosures are generally down, and we're moving on to a different stage. On the other hand, employment has been slower to recover. The unemployment rate, which I think is about 7.6%, remains about 7.6% nationally. We clearly have been adding jobs, though. There's a lot of jobs being added. But the unemployment is higher in the Midwest than in the U.S. So things have gone more slowly in the Midwest. We've been slower to recover as compared to the rest of the country. Unemployment, Midwest is higher than the U.S., Illinois is higher than the Midwest, and Chicago is higher than Illinois. So we have a very high unemployment rate right now in Chicago and in our area. In Illinois, of course, we're plagued by budget and pension problems, and I'm quite sure we have $100 billion in unfunded pension liabilities in Illinois, and the worst credit rating of any state in the country, making anything that we do in Illinois any more expensive. But even as the state has struggled and the Midwest has been slow to recover, resources continue to flow to Chicago. And I think Tony Preckwinkle referenced this. This is very interesting that we have this emergence of these global cities, and there's no question that Chicago is has emerged as the capital of the Midwest, and even as other parts of the Midwest have declined, more resources have come to Chicago. And I say Chicago, the Chicago region, as she says, not necessarily the city of Chicago, though we have lots of downtown job development, but the region of Chicago continues to have resources concentrated in it. We have a vibrant core. Our downtown core has been called the hottest urban center in the US. A recent report listed Chicago among the top 10 globally competitive cities, top 10 globally competitive cities among US cities, second only to New York, in its ability to attract capital, talent, businesses, and people. But we are certainly characterized by a divergent economy, and as they say, our own tale of two cities. The bust did not hit all areas equally, and the recovery is proceeding unevenly across our region. Downtown and in our strong areas, we see housing starts, population gains, and recovery of real estate prices. On the other hand, our weaker areas continue to be plagued by high unemployment, abandonment, foreclosures, population loss, and stagnant values. Let me give you a few illustrations. In the housing crash, real estate values in Chicago declined about 40% overall, about 40% drop. Ranged in different types of housing, went down different amounts, but let's just say about 40%. But some segments of the market, geographically speaking, some declined as little as 10%, while others lost 80 to 90% of their value. Here's an example that DePaul had done for us on some two-flat sales. Compares 2006 and 2010 two-flat sales, and with household income in the respective area. So looking at in Garfield Park, for better or worse, we had two flats going for about $305,000 in 2006. One could say, when you look at the household income, I mean, you're looking at the bubble there. You know, should there be a relationship of whatever that is, 9 to 1 or something like that between those prices of household income and sale price? I don't know. But actually well, wait, is that right? 20? No, it's more than that. I'm sorry. It's, who's got quick math on this? This is 150, no, it's about 15 to 1. So it's about 15 to 1. And so that was 50, but actually that was in Edgewater the same thing then. They had a household income of about $40,000 and almost $600,000 in value. So that's where it was, for better or worse, in 2006. Was that inflation, inflated credit, inflated prices? So 2010, after the crash, Edgewater goes down to $306,000. So maybe that's a more realistic relationship to household income there, something like 7 to 1 then. But that's a 48% decline in value. But you had a 48% decline in value, but what that also says to me is that's painful. That's not fun for anybody. But on the other hand, there's still $306,000 to me says there's a market demand for that. Somebody will buy, people, those are sales being recorded. Somebody's buying that and using that as a two-flat, as living in it, probably getting a mortgage and a loan and so forth. In Garfield Park, that's not happening. There's not really home buyers buying these buildings for $50,000. When you say $50,000, in a different way you could say there's no market in those areas. So I can assure you, that is not a home buyer buying a two-flat for $50,000 in Garfield Park. What that is an investor in making a cash purchase of a building likely is not to be sitting there as a vacant building right now. But an 83% decline in Garfield Park. So that was the distress, how the crash did not hit all areas. An illustration didn't hit all areas equally. Now look at the recovery here. Values also have recovered very differently in neighborhoods throughout the Chicago area. So this is an example of multifamily rental properties. This is, I don't know if you're all familiar with the idea of a cap rate, but the cap rate is basically capitalization rate, the percent return, the return you're going to get on your investment in a building. And so in Lincoln Park right now, the properties there, multifamily, might enjoy a cap rate of 4%. In fact, I've been to meetings where people discuss, yeah, does it make any sense to, what sense does it make to buy a building in Lincoln Park at a 4% cap rate? By the way, for comparison purposes, a few years ago, typical cap rates would have been 7 or 8% across the board, which means you're looking for a 7 or 8% return. So the question at these meetings is, why do we want 4%? Does that make sense to anybody? That's crazy. Well, it's not crazy if you can get 0 on your 1% on your deposits at the bank and you don't make money anyplace else. This whole question, what do you do with your money? So 4%, that's extraordinarily low. On the other hand, in a weak, disinvested area, we've seen cap rates as high as 16%, sometimes even higher than that. So 16%, I want you to understand, is very high. So what that means is that this is just, all this is a reflection of how a market looks at an area. And so this means, what this means is that a multifamily property with the same net operating income is worth 4 times more in Lincoln Park than in a weak area. That's what, because this cap rate is 16% higher. So it'd be worth only 1/4 as much with the same income. People say, oh, it's making so much in net income on this, it should be worth this. It's not. They're not all worth the same because of the market's treatment of these neighborhoods. These cap rates measure the market's perception of risk and the quality of life in the various neighborhoods. We can also look at the gains and losses of housing units. Overall, the city of Chicago gained 3,000 units from 2007 to 2011. This is part of in our recovery. How are we doing? We've heard about the hot downtown, the hot loop. When we look more closely, we see that downtown and Westtown, Logan Square, Lincoln Park, Lakeview, among them, they actually added 26,000 units. That means the rest of the city, there was a loss of 23,000 units. So this wasn't, we had a big ad going on downtown, almost comparable, almost equal loss going on in the rest of the city. And the places that led in the loss were Chatham, Woodlawn, South Shore, Englewood, Auburn Gresham, Austin. In suburban Cook County, Calumet City and Harvey sustained the greatest losses in the number of housing units. My point being, the units are being lost in the low-income areas and the areas that have suffered the most disinvestment. So in our discussions today, I ask you to keep these things in mind. There's a growing need for affordable rental units. Most affordable rental units are privately owned and privately financed. Most are located in buildings with less than 50 units. Most are located in low and moderate income neighborhoods that face many challenges with respect to credit, housing demand, and overall quality of life. And then on the other side of the coin, we can also remember that as conditions continue to improve in strong areas, this is the flip side of the coin, there will be more owners of publicly assisted housing that are likely to opt out of government programs. Today we can look back on many accomplishments of the Preservation Compact. Julie mentioned energy savers. Almost 900 buildings with 35,000 units have had energy assessments. 350 buildings with 12,000 units have been retrofitted. These retrofits result in 30% savings in energy consumption and utility bills. By the way, that's why we did this, to cut operating costs in multifamily buildings. There were 2 operating costs that were the most out of control: energy and taxes. This was our response on the energy front. This is the most successful program in the country that addresses energy conservation in privately owned multifamily housing. With the backing of the Preservation Compact, the Cook County Board established a uniform property tax assessment rate for all residential property, eliminating a historic bias against multifamily rental housing in the Cook County property tax system. This has resulted in a 16% decrease in property taxes for multifamily buildings across Cook County. So the two costs that were most out of control, energy costs, we've got a way to go down 30%. Property taxes on average declined 16% for multifamilies. Currently, we're working with partners to create property tax incentives to encourage owners to improve and maintain affordable rental properties. We've also convened a working group on 2 to 4 unit properties, 2 to 4 unit properties, by the way, contain 1/3 of the rental units in Cook County, 1/3. So the working group asked CIC to develop a financing product to enable responsible investors to acquire and rehab these rental units in targeted neighborhoods. Why would we do that? Because the home ownership demand has lagged so, and these buildings are sitting there vacant. With yesterday's announcement by Attorney General Lisa Madigan, we can announce that she awarded funds to us for a loan loss reserve, and we will be able to kick off a $22 million loan program for this purpose for investor-owned small buildings in the near future. Preservation Compact partners have convened regularly to identify at-risk, publicly funded properties, and we have worked with an interagency group comprised of city, county, state, HUD, and tenant representatives to improve, stabilize, and maintain contracts on nearly 50 government-assisted properties. Julie also mentioned the Joint Compliance Working Group. Staff from Ida, Cook County, and the City of Chicago coordinated pilot joint inspections of files and creating consolidated documents and processes for properties with funding from multiple government agencies. And I'm sure, so the developers of publicly assisted housing in the room, I'm sure you would welcome this, and you're welcome to join in the efforts to tell us where things need to be coordinated and streamlined. Julie also mentioned the DePaul's Institute for Housing Studies. They have become firmly established as the region's go-to source for data and analysis of the affordable rental market. They've provided much of the data that we will see today, including information on the supply and demand for affordable rental housing, multifamily financing trends, demographic information, impact of changes to the property tax system, and data on 1 to 4 unit buildings. The Preservation Compact has established a forum for building owners to meet with public officials. Working with Mayor Emanuel's Innovation Delivery team, we are working to improve building code violation records, the scheduling of building inspections, and building registration requirements. So as we review all of our progress today, we need to ask ourselves, are we pursuing the right strategies to meet today's challenges? In our breakout sessions, we want to have focused discussions on some of today's key questions. Session 1, preservation strategies in strong markets. This is what we were talking about, the publicly assisted. We'll look at publicly assisted housing in strong rental markets, in which we can anticipate a renewed interest in opting out of government programs. Probably time to pull back off the shelves those programs and responses that we had developed when this was more of an issue. It's going to be an issue now and going forward. So let's try to get ahead of that and see what we need to do to pull the old strategies off the shelf and maybe add some new ones. Number 2 session, energy savers. So if energy savers is so good, why aren't all the property owners in Cook County participating? We've touched, I think, about 10% of them. It's a wonderful program. Why isn't everybody participating? What needs to be done to dramatically expand participation in the program? Session 3, we'll look at the special case of 1 to 4 unit buildings. I expanded my 2 to 4s to 1 to 4s because there's lots of vacant single families as well. These buildings, which have traditionally been financed as owner-occupied single-family buildings, already contain, they actually contain nearly 1/2 of the rental stock in Cook County. Now here's the funny thing. You may be saying, I thought you said 33%. There's 33% in the 2 to 4 units. When you add in the single families, there's another X percent, 17%. It's more than a half of the rental units in Cook County, astoundingly, are in 1 to 4 unit buildings. So when I say they're in small buildings, they're in small buildings. But this is half of them are in 1 to 4 unit buildings, half of our rental units. With thousands of units in these buildings sitting vacant today, what do we need to do to get these buildings back into productive use? And I would say one answer can be our loan program I talked about, but that's gonna handle a few hundred, 400, 500 units. What about the rest of them? We got a lot of them. In session 4, community development to preserve rental housing. Community development to preserve rental housing. We will ask what can be done to restore the quality of life in low and moderate income communities that, as I said, already contain 75% of Cook County's rental units. But they've suffered greatly from foreclosure, abandonment, disinvestment, and population loss. So how do we build the communities surrounding this housing in order to preserve this valuable housing stock? After the breakout sessions, we'll have a plenary discussion on financing for multifamily housing. Financing, what's happened to it? Where is it? Why? What do we need to ensure that financing will be available to rehab and preserve affordable rental housing throughout Cook County? Finally, we will have a keynote address by Richard Florida, a prominent urban theorist. He's author, you may know him as author of The Rise of the Creative Class. Dr. Florida will describe his latest research, which I think is very interesting, on the need for cities to provide a high quality of life, including well-maintained, affordable housing for all their residents, not just the creative class, in order to be globally competitive in the 21st century. It promises to be an exciting, stimulating day. We look forward to engaged, informed discussions, a lot of networking. The discussions will guide us in our future strategies to preserve affordable rental housing in Cook County. I want to thank all of you again for your attendance and for your commitment to the Preservation Compact. Now, I have a few housekeeping items. First, restrooms. Where are restrooms? Down the hall and to the right. Somebody want to point for me? They're over that way. Restrooms are down the hall to the right, over that way. After today's conference, a reception generously sponsored by PNC will follow our keynote address from 5 to 6:30 with an open bar, beer, wine, and hors d'oeuvres. That means you have to stick to the end for that. In a few minutes, we will move to the next room next door for lunch. We will have a greeting on behalf of Mayor Emanuel by the head of his innovation delivery team, Paras Desai, and a report from the Bipartisan Policy Center Housing Commission from Barry Zegas. First, I'd like to acknowledge our friends and partners who their work has led to the success that's been achieved thus far by the Preservation Compact. So first, I'd like here in our room any members of the Preservation Compact Leadership Committee to stand. Our Leadership Committee, stand. Julie, all right, we got stay standing. Hold on, you have to stay standing, because we're going to have lots of people standing by the end. The Leadership Committee is the core group that has identified issues and guided the overall direction of the compact. Stay standing. Now, anyone who's a participant on one of our working groups, please stand. You know who you are, working group participants? These are the folks who meet regularly to more fully develop and take action on issues on the working groups. Okay? Next, any representatives of our Preservation Compact partners. These are the agencies funded by MacArthur to broaden the impact of the Preservation Compact to many issues in many parts of Cook County. In addition to CIC, they include CNT Energy, the Sargent Shriver National Center on Poverty Law, the Chicago Rehab Network, the Chicago Community Loan Fund, LISC, Chicago Institute for Housing Studies at DePaul, and the Metropolitan Planning Council. Please stand, all of you. And any of our other, I see people who are not standing who I know are working with us. So any representatives of the city, state, county, federal government who are working with us, please stand. Added a few. All right, that's all. These are the core people that are working. Thank you all very much. So thank you all, and now it's off to lunch and a great conference. Thank you very much.